Bună seara, doamnelor și domnilor, vă spune Ruxandra Săraru, care vă invită la o nouă ediție a emisiunii Oameni care mișcă România. Invitatul meu din această seară este domnul Richard Calver, coordonator regional pentru Europa Centrală și de Sud, pentru lupta împotriva crimei organizate de la Ambasada Marii Britanii din București. Hello, Mr. Calver, welcome to Radio Romania Actualități.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for coming and talking to us.
We all talk about organized crime, but few know what it is and how it should be approached and fought. I would like to refer to this first.
Certainly. Firstly, I should apologise for not being able to speak Romanian, despite having lived in Romania for 3 years. My Romanian is very poor, and I am ashamed about that. So, firstly, my apologies for that.
Oh, it's accepted, but it's very good that you accept to be invited in my show.
Thank you. I'm very touched. I'm very privileged. So yes, as you said, my role is to coordinate the response to organised crime. And I think organised crime is something which to a lot of people is very nebulous. It's something which people don't see on a daily basis. And so people don't realise how much it impacts on everybody's lives. Anyone who pays taxes, anybody who uses healthcare systems, anybody who uses public transport or anything that the state provides are all victims of organised crime in the long run. Organised crime is, in effect, groups of people coming together to commit crime for money, and that money is money which deprives the state, deprives individuals, and really exploits some of the most vulnerable people in our communities who actually need that support the most.
What is the United Kingdom's approach to tackling organized crime?
In the UK, we approach things maybe slightly differently from some countries in that we see organised crime is not just a police problem. It's not just something for law enforcement to deal with. We understand that a lot of the factors that drive organised crime are underlying problems in political, social, cultural or economic factors. So we understand that to deal with crime in the long run, we need to look at those as well as actually arresting people and prosecuting people when crime happens. So for us, dealing with the problem is just as important as dealing with the symptom.
Yes, you are right. Usually, when we think about the progress made by new technology, we don't believe that the world of criminals moves at the same pace as society. Sometimes, however, they seem to take us ahead of us, and we must adapt to their rhythm. How can we do this?
That's a very good question, and sometimes I wish I had a perfect answer to it. Criminals don't have to adhere to the rules that we do. They have a lot more money, they have a lot more resources, and they don't have the restrictions that we have on how they can spend that money. So I think for us, the key is for us to remain adaptable and to recognise that just because something is a problem today doesn't mean it will be tomorrow, and vice versa. We have to be open-minded for threats that will appear when criminals see an opportunity. In terms of technology, we definitely need to be more innovative in terms of our use of technology, and sometimes we need to be brave and not afraid to fail, because unless we try new things, we don't know what works and we don't know what doesn't. But again, I think as I come back to the sense of if we tackle the root causes, those normally will stay the same despite the changes in technology. So by dealing with the underlying problems, it gives us a better ability to adapt to new threats as they arise.
In our globalized and interconnected world, borders are much harder to defend. What is your role as a regional coordinator in combating cross-border crime?
Yes, international cooperation is absolutely crucial. The vast majority of organised crime that impacts on Romania and impacts on the UK is international crime that crosses borders. And without addressing it on an international basis, we're doomed to fail. So my role is to coordinate the UK's response across 11 countries, and that's a whole government response. So looking at things, as we discussed, as about political, education, welfare, cultural factors that give rise to crime. But just dealing with them in one country won't be effective because we recognize that criminals don't see borders like we do.
Yes.
It's much easier for a criminal
They
to
have
cross.
no borders.
None whatsoever. And we sometimes expect the world to be structured the way that we are internally within our governments, and actually the way people operate across border is very different to us. So my approach is trying to find the factors that have the biggest impact across the most countries for the least resource. So where do we have the biggest impact for the least effort?
Yes. How do we stop using criminal funds to undermine our way of life?
Yes, this is a real challenge. As I touched on, the reason that organised crime exists is to make money. And that money can go to drive further crime, or it can go to create other problems in our societies. I was actually at an event in Athens last week where somebody used the phrase, and I'm not going to claim it's mine, but it's brilliant, when we look at funds that come from crime, is it the fruit or is it the fuel? And I think we need to be focusing more on the fuel than the fruit. We've spent a lot of time historically trying to take the fruits of people's crimes off them when we talk about funds, but we've not focused too much on it being the fuel to drive further crimes and further issues like terrorism, like disinformation campaigns, like things which undermine the very basis on our societies that we live in.
Yes, a great problem. How do you prevent, and we prevent young people from seeing crime as a legitimate livelihood? How?
It's very difficult. The societies we live in, where wealth and power and status are all important. I thankfully am slightly too old to have lived in the full social media generation, but the Instagram of today, which shows everybody how great your life could be, there is a real drive for people to always push for more, and that means that people will push the boundaries of what's acceptable and what's legal. I think, from my perspective, providing legitimate alternatives. It sounds very simple and maybe too simple, but education and building confidence in young people is a great way to stop people falling into crime as an opportunity. I think we see both people becoming victims of crime due to poverty and also people choosing to be perpetrators of crime due to lack of opportunity. And if we can tackle both of those in equal measure, I think it gives us a chance, but ultimately it is a very difficult social problem that affects every country in the world.
Sometimes using more resources, both within and outside government, is necessary. How do you coordinate all these resources to have a real impact in the 11, you told, 11 countries under your supervision?
I kind of refer to it in the terms of we need to meet people where they are, not where we think they are. And often relying on partners both within state institutions, but also non-governmental organizations, civil societies, charities, are able to engage with people that we would never be able to, both in terms of coordinating how we help them, how we protect them, but also coordinating how we learn and the information that we gather that helps us form our decisions on what policies and what action we take against the threats. I know that I've relied heavily on quite a few think tanks who are external to government who give me a different perspective. And that comes back to your question of how do we adapt and how? By listening to new ideas and by bringing together people who come from different backgrounds and with different interpretations. It helps give us a more balanced view and a better understanding, and then gives us stronger opportunities to help people that maybe we didn't even realize were there.
I know that the strategic line of work for your network is the fight against cash-related crime. What is this crime more important than online transaction or cryptocurrency transfers? It's a big fight for this.
Mm-hmm. In the modern world, where, as you rightly say, we have cryptocurrencies, we have vast levels of financial technology that help us in our day-to-day lives, the expression cash is king is still very appropriate. Criminal groups still rely on huge sums of cash. A large number of the crime types that we class as organised crime, things like drug dealing, cigarette smuggling, people trafficking, all rely, and the end product is cash. So criminal groups need to move that cash somewhere and somehow get it back into a legitimate banking system. And we know that the easiest way of doing that, and we've seen from criminal groups in the UK, is that they will smuggle it across borders. Again, as we talked about borders being a key issue.
Yes.
Because if you take money from one country and you pay it into a financial sector in another country, it breaks the investigative chain, so it makes it harder for people to follow that money. And so for me, stopping the movement of cash from the UK to other countries around the world is one of my highest priorities. Again, trying to focus on the fuel and trying to take the fuel out of the engine of crime, but also trying to stop the additional risks that that cash can cause, because £500,000 in a suitcase is very dangerous. It can be used for all sorts of things that harm us and harm our societies.
What is good practices in Great Britain regarding combating cash smuggling? What are the significant legislative changes, and how can this model be taken over and applied, for example, in our country, in Romania? It's very important, this.
Absolutely. We're very fortunate that we have a piece of legislation which has been in existence now for just over 20 years. It's called our Proceeds of Crime Act, and it gives us both criminal and civil abilities to tackle illegal finances. The key part of that is the civil forfeiture, which means that if we find somebody with a suitcase with £500,000 of cash in it, we can take an action against the cash and not against the person. So a civil prosecution against the cash is saying, more likely than not, rather than beyond all reasonable doubt, that cash has either come from or is going to be used in crime. It makes no assertion of the guilt on the person. It doesn't say you've committed an offence. It just says the bag of cash you've got with you, we are going to take to a judge, and we're going to present a case to that judge that we believe that has come from or will be used in crime. And that process means that we can take cash out of criminals' hands much quicker without full criminal conviction processes, which take an awful long time. The person doesn't come out with a criminal conviction. They have an opportunity to defend the case and get the money back. But it does mean that last year in the UK we seized £330 million off criminals, and half of that was done through that civil mechanism, which requires a judge to make a decision but doesn't require us to criminally convict the person who's found with the money.
How should the international joint effort to combat cash smuggling be organized?
The problem we face is that we all have different priorities, and we all have different legislation, and we all have different needs for our societies. Jobs like mine are about trying to bring people together to try and get over those hurdles, and with strong partners like Romania, we are having huge successes in tackling those issues, the issues which affect both you and us. We have a huge Romanian diaspora in the UK, and quite often we see those connections are exploited by crime groups as transit between the two countries increases. So breaking down barriers in terms of cultures and legislative issues is a key one, and bringing people together to really recognise the underlying problems of what we should be tackling. And I think for every country in the world, many of those problems are the same. So rather than looking at the things that we have different in terms of the crimes that happen, the underlying drivers and enablers, as we call them, will be the same in both our countries. So we can easily work together on those to stop crime happening in the first place.
And the last question. I know there is a special policy in United Kingdom where a large sum recovered from criminals are invested by the government and used to make your country a safer and a better place to live. How could we do the same in Romania?
That's right. So I mentioned the figure of 330 million. That goes into a system which is called our Asset Recovery and Incentivization Scheme. It's a very long title, but it is a structure which allows that money to be invested back into our economy. If the money has been seized through the civil forfeiture process I mentioned, where we're taking a case against the cash rather than the person, 50% of that money, so that was nearly 165 million last year, goes back to the law enforcement agency that seized it. So that the police force or the border police or the customs authority who sees it will get 50% of it back. There are some restrictions on what they can spend it on, but it has to be things which build their capacity, which improve their operational capabilities. And then other funds go back into victim reintegration schemes, into compensation for people who've been victims of organised crime, and into wider government initiatives to strengthen our ability to tackle illicit finance and to secure our borders. That method can be applied in any country. How you would choose to split those ratios is entirely up to you. We can certainly give some guidance on the things we've learned are successful and the things that aren't great. But I think it's really important to see the value of new legislation and that you can really put bad money to good use.
Thank you, Mr. Calver, for this interview. If you have a message for our audience in the final discussion.
A message of thank you. Thank you for making Romania such a wonderful home for me for the last 3 years. I only have 1 year left here, and I'm very, very excited to see what we can deliver in terms of taking this cash project forward and looking at what we can achieve in Romania to protect everybody from the harms that's caused by criminal cash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Calver. Aici se încheie ediția din această seară a emisiunii Oameni care mișcă România. A fost Richard Calver, coordonator regional pentru Europa Centrală și de Sud, pentru lupta împotriva crimei organizate de la Ambasada Marii Britanii din București.